This is The Change Physician, episode 247. Welcome back to The Change Physician. I'm Melissa Cady, the Challenge Doctor, with my co-host, Dr. Kevin Cuccaro, to bring a little discussion from our recent episode with Dr. Cory Fawcett. It was actually titled The Doctor's Guide to Smart Career Alternatives in Retirement, which is actually his book. So make sure to check out the show notes on the video from YouTube, which has a link that you can go to find that book. But we thought we'd just have a little deep dive on that and talk a little bit about what we heard, our thoughts. And why don't you take it away, Kevin, and get us rolling on it?
Yeah, sure. So the Doctor's Guide to Smart Career Alternatives in Retirement, just like most of Cory's book, there's a lot of information in this. And I think he even mentioned it. There's basically kind of like three books. There's sort of your career, and then there's a non-clinical section, and then really the guide to retirement. So there's different phases, I would say, in this book, and a lot of information that we didn't get to cover completely. One of the things that though surfaced really, really early for me was the idea of people are like, I hate medicine, blah, blah, blah. I want to get out. And when you see the physician forums, oh, blah, I want to retire early and fire and blah, blah, blah. Well, why don't you instead work on creating the practice that you want? But the one key piece of that, which I can't remember if we talked about or not, but I flagged it. I actually wrote it down, was when Cory was talking about designing his own practice. And when he started becoming really aware and really kind of cognizant of when to do it, was when he paid off his mortgage. I think it was his mortgage. So why does that become important? To me, is like, and I don't know what his internal situation is, but we know that when you are under significant distress, it is very, very difficult to see options. When you are under stress, your viewpoint tends to narrow. It starts to you can't think about next step scenarios, can't think long term. You don't have a lot of creative thinking that's involved with it as very well. And so I thought that was very interesting, is because it was after he paid that off that he'd be able to see. And so I wanted to point out to other people is, if you are having a really hard time struggling with finding alternatives to your practice, maybe you hate where you are, you hate what you're doing. One of the is just to be aware of how stressed you are. If you are under stress, it becomes harder to see those alternatives, and also more likely to discount them when someone is telling you. So if you're aware of it, though, then you can see that little trigger and say, hey, wait a second here. Is this because this isn't true, or I really have no options, or am I simply really stressed out and I'm not letting myself to actually fully appreciate them? Because there are always options. That's something we talk about all the time on this podcast. If you are a physician, you have options. So that was a really big one for me. The second one that kind of built right into that as well is understanding what it is that you want and also what you don't want. What makes you happy about your practice and what makes you unhappy. And being really aware of both of them then allows you to either craft a scenario where you're asking, and we talked a lot about that, is just because your contract says something doesn't mean you can't do it. And just because your practice doesn't do something doesn't mean it's not possible. If you haven't talked to somebody, if you haven't approached whoever you're with, or if you're an administrator, or if you're in an employed situation, talk about revising your contract, thinking about positive options. It would be good to have a negotiator on here, because if you put those in a win-win scenario, I think, and you get the right people involved, you're much better to have that kind of that negotiation. If you're in a private practice and you think, well, I can't do this because it's going to kill me financially, well, really drop out the numbers and think. Like, I love the part where he talked about, like, I hate vascular surgery, I didn't want to do it anymore. And he thought it was gonna, he thought that was the reason he didn't want it. He kept doing it until he paid off his mortgage. And then when we did that and he didn't have that stress, then he's like, well, okay, I can drop vascular now. I'm not worried about that. And then his income didn't change because the referral pattern switched. His vascular went to the guy who loved doing vascular, and the stuff that the guy that loves doing vascular that he liked to do ended up coming to him, because there's only so much any one person can do. And there's so much volume out there. So I really enjoyed that discussion. And so the three things is being aware of stress in your decision making, to really understanding what it is that makes you unhappy versus not, A little more there we can get into a little bit here. And then last thing is making sure you see the options and don't make decisions for future outcomes based on no or partial knowledge. That's like filling in. It's like, no one's going to agree to this because instead it says, I haven't asked this, so I don't have the data to actually say whether or not this is going to be acceptable or not acceptable.
Yeah. Yeah. I was thinking about, some of the initial things you said, and just change in general is, you talk about stress and how you get narrowed in your view of things. And, for a lot of things, the way to set yourself up for success is to be aware of those things and be able to, sometimes like people just want to change how they're eating or whatever it is. I mean, it could be career, it could just be your activity, whatever it is. Sometimes you have to set the stage so that you can be less stressed and maybe take that opportunity. It's easier to take those opportunities and see the bigger picture. If you're aware of the things that are stressing you out or the things you could change so that you can put yourself in a better situation. That was one of the things I thought about. And you'd already kind of mentioned the contracts and how they a lot of times they're for 1 year and then they just auto renew, and always having a copy, having access to it, knowing when the reset date in the next year is coming around. And like, Kevin, you said, is just being aware of the things you love and don't love and see if there's something you can negotiate with that contract for the following year. And see how
that was a huge one that I had forgot about until you said about. Is because there's so many people, I think, just let those things auto renew until someone else changes it.
Mm-hmm.
And we tend to, I think as physicians, and obviously this is my bias, we tend to think that there's all this external stuff that's driving us. And we forget that the same things that other people are using to kind of control our practice environments, we also have control over as well. And the contract was a big one. So when he was talking about reviewing your contract, like I would say you review your contract annually. And you certainly review it every time it's up for renewal again, probably 30, 60, whatever your time frame in advance that you need to do is freaking brilliant. Because the longer you've been practicing and the more established you are, and depending on, I hate to say it, but how much money you're generating or whatever, you are the longer you've been there, the more control you should have if you were working with a smart practice. And granted, a lot of health systems are run by a bunch of ding dongs. But I mean, seriously, I was like, this is the thing like I've heard. So we talk about asking for options, right? Ask options. Don't say no to yourself. So do you want to work half day? Ask. Don't say, oh, they're never going to allow it, because you don't know. Because a smart health system knows how much it costs to recruit a new physician. Last time I remember is like $250,000 for a family doc, for a general practitioner. I think it's probably more than that now. So it would make more sense to keep your docs happy and work with them than it is to say no, then lose them, particularly if you're willing to walk and start over again. Now, granted, some places are dumb and they're dumb. We're just like flat out stupid. But the smart places will be like, oh, well, how can I keep this person happy? They're a good producer. They don't have any complaints. The patients are happy with them or whatever. Let's make sure this doctor's happy so they don't leave. So those contract renewers, man, that was gold, like total gold.
Yeah. And there's an element here we haven't talked about that as physicians, I think we minimize, not everyone, but I do think there's a lot of times we get used to this kind of like black and white. This is just how it's done and da, da, da. And in the process, in a way, we're kind of devaluing our own value that we have, or devaluing ourselves, and that there is a lot of times room for negotiation, especially if you're miserable, if you're burned out, and there's something that little tweak, you don't even realize. Sometimes people have no idea how much one little change, whether it's just take one day off instead of working 5 days, working 4 days. Like sometimes you have no idea because you've never lived your life that way. You don't realize how they can radically transform your mental health, your just joy in life in general, personally or professionally, and all of it bleeds over. I mean, you can't say that these things don't affect you as a person. So when you deal with the contracts, you basically are saying, you don't have to be, annoying about it or like I'm better than you. It's just, I provide great service. I do good for my patients. And, I really, whether it's a raise, it could be you've been working there 10 years. I don't know. But whatever it is, you feel like could make a difference for you, that means you're valuing what you bring to the table. And sure, like you said, it's possible that they could be like, nope, sorry, let you go. But if they do value you and or they want to keep you, because Lord knows right now there's just like so much need for help right now, that there is a lot of negotiations that could be successful. And so it just reminded me just recently, I won't go into details, but even my husband, who's not medical, just like, just say you need this and you need this, and it doesn't have to be black and white, even though I want it to be black and white. It's either yes or no. And then you present something different, and then lo and behold, they change the terms of what they normally do. And so you just never know. Sometimes opportunities or changes in what you're doing can arise by just going forth with the conversation and just see what happens. I mean, the worst case scenario is that they say see ya, or nothing changes, and then you make the decision at that point. So at least you tried. That's how I see it now. But
I've been trying to remember the saying about like, don't be the one to say no to yourself or something. That's not how it was.
Oh,
yeah. Basically, is like we tend to like think, and if you're a big thinker like me, you think, well, I'm going to do this, and then you plat three actions down the line, and they're like, oh, they're going to say no. So then you don't do it, right? Don't say no to yourself. Let someone else say no.
Mm-hmm.
And because man, so just because you think no one's going to do it doesn't mean that that's the way other people are going to think. So
right,
it's so important is to just ask.
Yeah.
And I'm horrible at that. Like it's a little uncomfortable. Maybe there's a fear of rejection or whatever. It literally is like, this is an exercise you could do to improve this is when you go out to eat, is ask if you can change something. You're getting a salad and they have, I don't know, whatever, bacon on it. Can you replace it with tofu or something? Little small things that you can do to simply ask for a change that's not written, so you get the practice doing it. Because that's something all of us should be, let somebody else say no. There actually, do you know Noah Kagan? He's in Austin.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So he had this exercise called the coffee challenge. And you would do is you would go in to a coffee place or whatever, and you would say, hey, can I have 10% off or whatever? You order your coffee. Oh, can I get 10% off? And like, well, why? And you just say, just because, right? Or whatever. I mean, he actually says, don't tell him it's your birthday, or just like say it's because. And the whole point of it is to actually get rejected.
Yeah.
Except sometimes you don't get rejected. It's like, they're like, okay, like, okay. But it's that kind of mentality, and it is hard. Like I should probably do that more. I don't do it enough. But it is important, I think, as a physician, because we tend to think that all decisions are kind of are written in stone.
Mm-hmm.
And really the rest of the world isn't actually, from the business side, they're absolutely positively not working off of that. Yeah. So anyway, go out there and ask for things that you want, like crazy, right? Ask for the things you want. What are they going to say? They can say no, in which case you're exactly where you are, or they could say yes and things can change.
Yeah. And so I think the complicating factor is there's quite a few physicians that are, I don't want to call them all people pleasers, but there's an element of caring or pleasing or just following the books, the rules. And that just doesn't follow that with what you're saying, like to ask. My husband's an expert at it. Like he can do it left and right with anybody and everybody. He has the capacity to talk to someone on Amazon about some other purchase and brings up my book and then ends up convincing them to buy my book while he's the customer like of Amazon. So he's just really good at negotiating or selling without them feeling like they're being sold to. Like he just has that business knack, I guess you can call it. But as physicians, I don't feel like that's kind of a knack that we have. So.
Yeah, I think as a people thing, like I think there's most, I want to say most of us, because this is the way I see it. I don't know if it's necessarily true. We have to actually pull and look it up. But I think most of us are somewhat scared of rejection. Mm-hmm. And I think that most of us aren't willing to ask for things because we're scared that they'll be rejected. And a lot of us, I think, we're taught to not ask for things. Yeah. This is the rules. This is the way you do it. And this is how you do it.
Yeah. Right? Don't question it.
Don't question it. Some of that may have to do with,
I'm sorry.
I was going to say some of that may have to do with the way that our school systems were historically designed, which has a very interesting history. on, why do we have bells and why do we sit down and why do we do the same things the same way. But it is uncomfortable, but because it is uncomfortable, it's probably something we should do. Maybe we should steal Noah's challenge, make some sort of change physician challenge thing. We won't call it the coffee challenge, and we'll credit Noah Kagan on it. But it's really powerful. Just ask for stuff.
Yeah. Well, one other thing on that is not only do you not want to be rejected, but there is also another element of when you, like, sometimes you can make that person uncomfortable, and we get uncomfortable because they're uncomfortable having to like say no, or I don't have the power to do that, or that kind of stuff. So yeah, I think there's like on both sides.
Well, and one thing I would say on that though is when you ask is then shut up. Because sometimes we both get uncomfortable and then you can see them and oh, never mind, right? No, just keep your mouth shut.
Yeah. Let them deal with their own.
And if they're uncomfortable, you can just stare at each other uncomfortably and see who the first one who talks is. But anyway.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. Yeah. So we talked about contracts and
and the clinical, and there was one other piece. We were talking about like kind of clinically related careers. Is making sure you understand why you're not happy. And I kind of predicted is unhappy versus not happy, because he did mention the time he thought he was going to quit medicine. Yeah. Because he was so upset, and it wasn't because of his medicine, it was because of a person who had a personal conflict with somebody. That was
interesting.
That was super, super interesting.
Yeah.
And I do think that's a big deal, because and I think that's why you walk, what do you like, what do you don't like? Because this is what we talked about this when we started the podcast, is there are a lot of people think they hate the practice of medicine.
Yeah.
They don't hate medicine. They hate the environment. They hate all this other external stuff. And the more you kind of recognize those things, then you can move towards what it is that you like. So there's your likes, your dislikes. You can move away from your dislikes and you can move towards your likes. That's not exactly the same exact path, although if you have them both lined out, you can align them a little bit better. But I thought that was a really, really good one, because I'm sure there's some people who think, oh man, I hate medicine. It's not medicine. It may be something else.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed. I know you mentioned we didn't really touch on everything in that.
We mixed the second third of it, which was the non-clinical. We didn't talk anything about the non-clinical careers.
Yeah. Consulting, there's all kinds of examples.
Expert witness, consulting, medical writing. I mean, you can't Google non-clinical careers for physicians. I kind of want to talk about it because I think the most important thing that people needs to understand when it comes to non-clinical careers is the vast majority of the time you are not going to make what you could in clinical practice.
Right.
Like maybe some super rare exceptions. You go off and you have your own business and it's successful. But I will tell you, even haven't had my own business, I was making money that people would consume or would assume was a successful business, like a small business. It was significantly less than what I would have made in clinical practice, significantly less.
Yeah.
Anyway, I just think that's important, because if you're if you're an orthopedic surgeon thinking you're going to drop out of orthopedic surgery and just take up medically writing and you make the same amount, that's a pipe dream. Right. And you need to be at least aware of it. Maybe you're going to be a Michael Crichton, maybe. But once you're at least aware of, you still can make pretty good money, more than a lot of people. And then we got to go question about like values and what you want your life to be, and question, we've talked a lot about that, like savings versus this and being within your means and what makes you happy. But I just think that's really important to people to understand is non-clinical tends to pay a lot less than clinical medicine, particularly now.
Yeah. Yeah. And there are a few people that go viral if they hit the social media light, and there's a
lot of people I would say that are on the social media that project that they're making more than they actually are.
That too. Yeah. But I do know that some of the people that end up going viral can be asked to, be like a keynote speaker, and for 1 hour can be paid 10 to 25 grand for, so there are those people that can do that. But I would say that first of all, you got to enjoy doing that to really keep that going.
And that sounds like a lot, right? So then you're
but
going
only if you do it a few times a year.
let's think you get 20 grand, which is insane for a speaker's fee.
Yeah.
Like insane, right?
Yeah.
So, okay, then now you have to do it for an average physician salary. You have to do that at least once a month, in order to get 240K, right? And that is in low average, I think, for most physician salaries now. Like it's actually gone up. And it is not easy to get 12 speaking gigs paying you 20 grand, right? So you can do it, but it's really hard. I mean, I knew a guy who, like, a lot of the authors, I think somehow I got a hold of somebody's like speakers fees. I think what happened is I was speaking at a conference and they had someone coming in and they accidentally replied all with the details of this guy who had written a bestseller and all that stuff. And it was like, I think they were getting like a little over 10 grand for the speech, plus like flights and stuff to get there. But it was a lot, particularly more than the rest of us who actually were providing what I would consider useful information, not like whatever, like this is useful for your practice. But it wasn't like, Oprah Winfrey or, whatever, making 200,000 with their speech or.
I mean, you're dealing with different levels of popularity of people, but there's some people have different streams of income. I mean, Dr. Anna Kabeka, the girlfriend doctor we've interviewed, I don't know exactly how much she makes, but she's private labeled things and done things. So who knows?
Oh, she's she's a business person, so she's got the clinical practice, then she's got the supplements. Yeah. So, and that's a whole different thing because anyway, once you're doing the selling thing, that's still hard. And she's done really well for herself. That's And so, and to do that well, you have to get used with rejection, and you should be doing things like asking for 10% off at the coffee place just for no reason at all and see what they say. Yeah. Yeah. Because there is a certain element of resilience you have to just move forward and actually be successful in the way that she has. So, I think, and one of the last things I wanted to mention about that conversation with Dr. Cory Fawcett was, I just like the fact that his favorite thing to do is help bring joy back into people's practice or their lives versus like not necessarily wanting them to retire, prematurely, but really to find joy in what they're doing and redesign their lives. So I like that. And that was, is whatever you're doing, finding joy in that. And again, that was one of the reasons we started this podcast is being able to find something meaningful there's a reason you went to medical school. We have all sorts of amazing options out there, and people are like, oh, I want to quit. I want to go, be a barista somewhere. Well, if that's your calling, sure, that's great. But if you're running away from something simply because you're running away and you don't know the reasons why, you're kind of throwing a lot of stuff down the drain that, we've had so many guests on that talk about their practice, what they've been doing, how they've, brought joy. It may be changing clinical practice, maybe open up a direct primary care clinic, and maybe something on the side. Anyway, so I thought that was really cool. He was talking as well. My last thing, if we had to talk about, would be the last third of the book, which he was talking about retirement, which, I don't really like that word. I really kind of think about it more of like a transition point. But another thing that he said is, when he was talking about retirement with one of his partners, remember, and the partner said, "Oh, that's great. What are you going to retire to?" Yes. That was like, awesome. Oh, that made me think that any sort of transition, you could use that phrase because there's transitioning from something and then there's transitioning to something. And if you're thinking about transitioning to, you're, at least in my opinion, and the way I kind of frame this as I think through it, that transition becomes much better. Yeah. Because rather than flee something into the unknown, now what you're doing is you're much more aware and intentional about the actions that you're taking. And obviously that rubbed my biases because that's what I'm doing exactly right now is I am in the active phases of trying to figure out how I'm going to transition to the next phase. Yeah. That next phase isn't happening next year, folks. But within the next 5 years, I'm kind of looking at things like, well, where do I want to be? Who do I want to be with? What do I want to do? It's a little overwhelming, but it's cool. And it is the first time in my life I've ever done this. So I love that, not retiring from, but retiring to, not transitioning from, but transitioning to. So what are you guys going to transition to?
Yeah.
That could be a new practice, new life, whatever.
Yeah. And I've got my own that I won't share at this point, but other things.
You'll share at some point. We're
Yeah.
waiting on you.
I want to know what this next 5 years, how that's going to look. So yeah, always opportunities and plenty of options out there for physicians. And so make sure to check out the book that Dr. Cory Fawcett wrote, The Doctor's Guide to Smart Career Alternatives and Retirement. And we'll put some show notes to click on that. I think it's on Amazon. You can find it there. But you want to take us out, Kevin?
Sure. Well, thank you all for joining us on this episode of the Change Physician podcast. As always, if you can join the community at thechangephysician.com, whether you are a physician or a physician ally. And until next time, stay well.
Take care.